Having now reviewed converting between fractions, ratios, decimals, and percents, let's dive into the amazing world of probability. What is probability? In our study, it will be the likelihood of an event occurring. In mathematics, it's often expressed as a number between 0 and 1, which is again another reason why we reviewed expressing numbers as fractions, ratios, decimals, and percents. It's the ratio of the number of favorable outcomes to the number of possible outcomes. We will initially be dealing with a single event, and the outcomes will be equally likely. If we are certain an event will occur, then the probability is 1, or 100%. If an event is impossible, the probability will be 0, or 0%. Let's consider tossing a fair coin. What's the probability of tossing heads? The favorable outcome here is heads, and there's only one way this can happen. We have two possible outcomes. It could be heads or tails. If we consider our formula, our event in this case is the heads turning up. The number of favorable outcomes, well, the number of heads that's possible, there's only one way that can happen. And our number of possible outcomes, there are two, heads or tails. We read this as the probability of heads equals 1/2. This can be expressed in other forms, as a ratio, 1 to 2, as a decimal, 0 and 5/10, as a percent, 50%. What if we're rolling a die, a fair die? Die, by the way, is singular for dice. What's the probability of rolling a 5? Our favorable outcome in this case is rolling a 5. Only one way this can happen. In terms of possible outcomes, well, there are 6. We can roll a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or a 6. If we consider our little formula, our event in this case is the idea of rolling a 5. Our favorable outcomes, there's only one way that can happen. Our possible outcomes, remember we have 6 of those. We read this, probability of rolling a 5 equals 1/6. This too can be expressed in various forms. As a ratio, 1 to 6. As a decimal, 0.1 and the 6 would repeat. As a percentage, we could say 16.6%, with again the 6 repeating. Let's consider probability using a scale, and you would have done this in previous grades. I essentially have a number line here. I have my beginning at 0 and my end at 1, because as you recall, probabilities get expressed between the values of 0 and 1. I have it split into 4 sections in this case. If I put in my fractions, I would get 1/4, 2/4 or 1/2, and 3/4. I could put in decimals, 0.25, 0.5, and 0.75. I could put in percentages for that matter, 0%, 25%, 50%, 75%, and 100%. We can also put words on our scale. For a probability of 0, that would be impossible, and a probability of 1 would be certain. Between 0 and 1/4, very unlikely, then unlikely, likely between 1/2 and 3/4, and very likely between 3/4 and 1. If I give you now a statement, and I say I want a word to express the probability, let's see what we come up with. It will snow at least once in the month of June in Twillingate, Newfoundland and Labrador. As much as we would probably like to say this would never happen, it is possible, but it is hopefully very unlikely. I will use very unlikely for that probability. The next toss of a quarter will result in tails. Recall that flipping a coin, it's a 50-50 probability. If this probability is falling right in the middle, then I will say either equally likely, or we could say equally unlikely. A person will survive 8 months without water. That is impossible. It will rain more than twice in Newfoundland and Labrador during the month of July. Some of you may say, well, that's certainly going to happen, but there is that very slim chance that we would not get any rain. But we are definitely going to put here, very likely. Don't forget, folks, we need some rain as much as we like our sun. And our final example, if there are only blue marbles in a bag and you pick out one marble, it will be blue. If there are only blue marbles in the bag and you pick out a marble, it will certainly have to be blue. Now I would like you to proceed to the next video in this lesson.